Welcome back to Past the Pumpkin's Glow. Before we dive into today's eerie adventure, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out on any of our haunting stories.
After graduating from high school, I moved into my grandparents' house. They had a half-finished basement that no one really used, so I decided to make it my own little space. I turned it into a bedroom, even though it's always felt a little bit off down there. But it's a pitch-black basement, what else would you expect? The darkness felt heavier, thicker somehow, but I chalked it up to the basement just being, well, a basement. One night, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard a voice clear as day. It was a little girl's voice, soft and innocent. She simply said, "Daddy?" I sat up, my eyes scanning the room for something. Anything that could explain what I'd just heard. But there was nothing. No little girl. No source of the voice, just the suffocating darkness. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that I must have imagined it. After all, I was studying Wicca at the time. My mind was probably playing tricks on me. My then-girlfriend had been practicing Wicca for a while. She had been guiding me through the basics. Maybe the studying, the rituals, the focus on the spiritual world, maybe all of it was messing with my head. But then, not long after hearing the voice, I received a text from my girlfriend. It was late, and her message was heavy. A confession that seemed to come out of nowhere. She told me about a miscarriage she had a couple of years before we met. She never mentioned it before, and the weight of her words hung in the air as I read. She had been pregnant with a little girl. A girl she had planned to name Bryn. The sense of unease from the basement returned with a vengeance. A few years later, life had moved on. The basement became a distant memory, a strange and eerie chapter in my life that I didn't dwell on. But one day, during a local bowling tournament, someone, brought it all back. It was a casual event. Nothing serious, just a bit of fun with friends. Our team was up against another. And as I glanced at the players on the opposing team, I noticed a little girl who couldn't have been older than 7 or 8. She had blonde hair and blue eyes, and there was something about her that caught my attention. She looked at me, and for a moment, I felt a strange familiarity, like I had known her somehow. When I asked someone her name, the answer stuck with me. Bryn. I couldn't help but wonder if this was just a coincidence, or if there was something more to it. Was it a sign? If so, a sign of what? And from whom? I never did figure it out, but the encounter stayed with me. The connection between the voice in the basement, my girlfriend's lost daughter, and this little girl named Bryn felt like a puzzle I could never quite piece together. After that night, I tried to communicate with the spirit I believed I had heard in the basement. I set up and performed little rituals, called out softly in the dark, but nothing happened. Just a creepy feeling that I was not alone. But one night, just as I was about to give up, I saw her. Or thought I did. A small blonde girl in a white dress, standing at the edge of my bed. She vanished before I could react, but the image burned into my mind. After that, the paranormal experiences were minor. Strange noises, cold spots, things moving on their own, but nothing like that night. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that there was something missed, some message or warning I never understood. And while I shared the story a few times, there's one part I kept to myself. One final experience that I rarely talk about. It's too bizarre, too unsettling, and every time I think about it, I can't help but wonder if it was all in my head, or if something far darker was at play.
When we first moved into that old, creaky house, the problem was immediately clear. Rats. They scurried across the floor at night, scratching at the walls, and the landlord couldn't care less. He flat out refused to do anything about it. We were stuck with the vermin. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the old woman from next door came by, asking for help. She needed some chairs brought up from her basement. She lived alone, so I figured I could help. Besides, I was curious about her place, as old as it was. She led me down the narrow wooden stairs, the steps groaning under our weight. The basement was dim, lit by a single flickering bulb. But what caught my eye was the darkness that clung to one side of the room. It wasn't just shadows. It was like the light refused to touch that part. "Why is it so dark over there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The old woman didn't hesitate. "That's where my daughter hung herself, on her wedding day." I felt a shiver deep in my bones. Why? She looked at me with those tired, sorrowful eyes. Her father and I denied her. She wanted to marry a man we didn't approve of. We didn't like him. I swallowed hard, suddenly wanting to be anywhere else. As I turned to grab the chairs, I froze. A figure stood there, right in the middle of the darkness, a woman in a wedding dress. Her face was pale, almost glowing in the dim light, and her eyes, they bore into mine. "Get out," she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. It wasn't a request. It was a command. I didn't think. I dropped the chairs and bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop running until I reached home, slamming the door behind me. But just as I did, I heard it thumping, crashing, a sickening thud. The sound of someone, no, something, falling down those stairs. I knew, deep down, it was the old woman's husband. I never went back, and the rats, they didn't seem so bad after that. Halloween night was supposed to be fun. My friends and I had spent the entire evening collecting candy, laughing at our costumes and daring each other to do ridiculous things. By the time we were done, our pillowcases were bulging with sweets. We decided to hit one more neighborhood before calling it a night. The fastest way there was through the woods, so I volunteered to take the shortcut alone while the others went around. It seemed like a good idea at the time. The woods were eerily quiet, with only the sound of leaves crunching under my feet. The moonlight barely pierced through the thick canopy, casting long, twisting shadows that seemed to move with every step I took. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the woods were always like this at night. But then I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. Footsteps. I stopped and turned around, squinting into the darkness. There was nothing there. The trees stood still, and the path behind me was empty. I let out a shaky breath, convincing myself it was probably just an echo or maybe a stray animal. I kept walking, my pace quickening, my grip tightening on the pillowcase full of candy. The footsteps started again, this time closer, more deliberate. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I spun around again, but once more, there was nothing. The silence was suffocating. Panic set in, and I dropped the candy and ran. I didn't care about the sweets anymore. I just wanted to get out of those woods. As I bolted down the path, I heard a raspy, guttural voice behind me. "You can run, but not forever," it croaked, followed by a low, sinister laugh that chilled me to the bone. I ran faster than I ever thought possible, branches scratching at my costume, the voice echoing in my ears. Bursting out of the woods, I found myself back on the street, gasping for breath, my heart hammering in my chest. My friend, who had dressed as the Swamp Thing, emerged from the woods a few seconds later, laughing hysterically. He might have seen me running and thought it was the funniest thing ever. But when he saw my face, his laughter faded. "Why were you screaming?" he asked, still catching his breath from laughing so hard. I could barely speak, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "That wasn't you?" I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling. He stared at me, confused. "What wasn't me?" he asked, his amusement gone, replaced by concern. I explained what had happened, every terrifying detail, hoping he would admit it was a prank. But he just looked at me like I was crazy. "I didn't see anyone else in there," he said slowly. And I definitely didn't say anything at her. I could tell he was serious, and that only made the fear claw at my insides even more. I know what I heard, and I know it wasn't my imagination. That voice, that laugh, It was too real, too close. Since that night, I haven't set foot in those woods again. I don't care how much candy is on the other side, I won't go back. Because deep down, I know that voice is still out there, waiting. And I'm not going to be the one to find out what happens if it catches up to me. Back in 2010, on a Wednesday night at around 9 p.m., I was driving home from work. Living in Texas, but with my home in New Mexico, I often took a rural road that connected to the interstate. It was a desolate stretch, lined with an electric generator, mesquite bushes, and the endless, dry desert. The only intersections led to a town south and another east. The night was cool, clear, with starry skies, and my headlights cut through the darkness as I navigated the lonely road. I had just taken a left turn when my truck suddenly died. Annoyed but not too concerned, I pulled over to the side of the road. The truck was in good shape. I had done a tune-up and bought a new battery just the previous weekend. Popping the hood, I checked the battery terminals. They seemed fine, but I tapped the battery anyway. The headlights flickered back on, and something felt off. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and a sense of being watched overwhelmed me. As I closed the hood, I turned and saw a hooded figure several feet away, slowly advancing. Panic surged through me as I noticed another figure, then another, emerging from the darkness. All of them had glowing red eyes. I scrambled back into my truck, hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I looked up, and one of the hooded figures was now standing directly in front of my truck, while others surrounded the vehicle. My breath hitched as one approached the driver's side door, revealing a pale face with those eerie red eyes. It pressed its hands against the glass, observing me intently, its breath fogging up the window. It opened its mouth, revealing creepy, jagged teeth, and its tongue slowly licked the glass. I turned to the passenger side, only to see more of these creatures, all observing me with the same unsettling intensity. They started trying to open the doors, and I could hear the handles being jostled. Finally, I managed to turn the key, and the truck roared to life. Just as I thought I might escape, the figure in front of my truck pointed at me and spoke in a chilling, clear voice. "We're coming for you soon." As if nothing had happened, they vanished into the night. Heart pounding, I floored the accelerator and sped home, locking every door and window once I arrived. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The memory of those red-eyed figures haunts me to this day, and their promise echoes in my nightmares. We're coming for you soon. Growing up in a small village in upstate New York during the 70s, I had multiple paranormal experiences. From one harmless end of the spectrum to the terrifying other. I guess the best place to start is by explaining a little bit what it was like growing up in the 70s. We didn't have the internet, and we didn't have thousands of channels to watch on TV. We just had 3 network TV channels and maybe 1 or 2 independent or public broadcasting channels. That's it for outside information. Unfortunately, I don't ever remember Sesame Street doing an episode about ghosts and demons and hauntings and poltergeists. The only other way we had to learn about the world was through experience. By experience, I mean both our own, what we read, and what other people told us that they had experienced themselves or heard about. It was normal for kids to sit with adults and be told stories about the history of the area or the family, including even the legends and local lore. It was in this oral tradition way that I learned about the history of the place I grew up in. Upstate New York had been home to many indigenous Native American tribes before European settlers arrived. They each had their own rituals and habits and practices that they followed on a daily basis. One of the things that was consistent between them was that this area where the village I grew up in was located was actually considered a bad place. It was believed to have dark spirits and other negative influences, and as such, was avoided completely. It was so avoided that the local tribes would actually travel around it entirely when going through the region. no matter how much extra time it added to the trip. Of course, when white settlers moved into the area, they ignored the warnings from the native guides and built a village there instead. This always explained to me why the paranormal experiences I had seemed to be based all around my house and not just inside the house itself. My childhood home was at the end of a small road with a small forest on one side, a field on another, and the Erie Canal, or Barge Canal, on a third. Because of the way it was situated, it was always very dark. Yes, there was the glow of a street lamp on the far outside corner of the property, but that was it. It did nothing to illuminate the sides of the house opposite the lit corner. More specifically, it did nothing to light up the opposite side of the house that instead faced the forest and canal, where my bedroom windows were located. Over the years, I saw many shadow people, as they're often called, at night, both in the forest and in my backyard. It was always at a distance, though. I saw them. They, at some point, saw me and would always take off running back into the forest. It seemed that that's where they were from. Honestly, even though they're called shadow people, it didn't seem right from my own experience. They weren't people like you or me, except in the most basic sense. They had 2 arms, 2 legs, a main body or torso, and a head, and that's where the similarities ended. They were tall, way taller, way bigger than any living person I'd ever seen. Even to this day, so many years later. They were also dark. Darker than any possible shadow could ever be. But shadows are what they remind us of. Except they're not against the wall. They're not stretching out across the floor in front of you or behind. They're standing there in the middle of a room or yard, a shadow floating in empty space, yet standing firmly on the ground. That's why I always called them simply shades instead. I don't know what other people are experiencing, but what I had experiences with was different to me. However, the idea of shadows defined them far better than the word people ever could. One main difference between a shade and a shadow is that the shades always seemed as solid as you or me. As I came to find out later, they had weight just like us too. Their faces weren't just empty darkness either. They had eyes. Eyes you could feel focused on you. They had their version of a nose, and they had their version of a mouth as well. We'd always had pets when I was younger. Almost always there was one cat at least, in addition to dogs and other animals. When I was in my early teens, we had a cat that used to like to sleep at the foot of my bed between my feet, on top of the blankets. It was a nightly routine for me to wake up during the night, nudge the cat with my foot to move so I can roll over or reposition my legs. This particular night was no different at first. I slowly came to from having slept for maybe 2 or 3 hours, feeling uncomfortable. I started to try to shift, but felt the familiar weight of the cat between my feet. I remember kicking up, lifting gently but alerting with my right leg. This usually made the cat move to the left, which would free both of my legs and allow me to do whatever I needed to do. This time the cat didn't move. I tried again, still nothing. Then I tried with the left leg. Still nothing. I tried moving both of them, one after another. I knew I had to be shaking the cat, but still no movement. It was at this point I realized that I didn't hear the purring. Usually when the cat slept between my feet, it purred. This time, however, it was quiet. I reached over and grabbed my glasses where they hung on the side of the bed and turned to face the end of the bed as I put on my glasses. My eyes focused in the darkness, the low, gentle light coming in from the hallway providing just enough light to see clearly and with definition. At first I could see my feet, and I could see the black form between them, which I took at first to be the cat. Then I realized the black form continued up, and up. It stretched toward the ceiling. As my eyes moved upward, I could see the hands and the arms, the chest, the shoulders, and finally the head, just grazing the ceiling at its top. That's when I realized the weight I felt between my feet. The thing sitting between my feet was actually standing between them instead. It was standing on the foot of my bed, looking down at me. I mentioned earlier about their eyes. You almost felt them in the back of your head while you stared at them face to face. You didn't see them directly, but you could feel them boring into you. Weirdly, as if it could get any more, immediately when you tried to remember or call up the image in your head, somehow your brain put eyes in their face. Piercing blood red, deep, penetrating eyes. I've often felt afterwards that my brain filled in the blanks of what it knew was there, when maybe I just couldn't see it. I knew it was staring at me, actually glaring down at me. Its gaze focused on how much it hated me. This wasn't hatred of an individual, this was blind, almost racial hate. Over the years, I've seen it on social media in images and video, showing in the eyes of demonstrators protesting against one group or another simply because they exist. I lay there petrified with fear. This was something new I'd never experienced before. We stayed there for several minutes until, finally, it just seemed to fade out. As it did, I could slowly see the wall behind it, better and better until finally it was gone. I had heard stories of shadow people. I had heard stories of how they watched and went on their own business and didn't even really interact or care that anyone was really there. This thing forever became something separate. This is when I began calling it a shade. This thing definitely cared that I was there and hated me for it. Somehow, after being around it once, I always seemed to be able to feel when one was around again or watching me. I can't describe it. It's just a chill that something feels when something else is watching it that wants it dead. Maybe this is what a rabbit feels when a wolf focuses on it. As scary as this was for my 12 or 13-year-old self, I'm glad I had the experience because I'm firmly convinced that it saved me years later when I was in college, and I had a shade approach me in my dorm room while I was sleeping. I attended a university in California, and this school, like so many others, had off-campus student housing. Essentially, apartment buildings managed by the school where they would house the various students in it. I was in a 2-bedroom dorm apartment. On one side of the living room was a door leading to a bedroom, closets, and bathroom, where my 2 roommates stayed. I had the similar room on the other side of the living room. Only main difference was at my side, for some reason, had an accordion door separating my bed area from the living room, where the other side had an actual door. I was supposed to have a roommate too, but as circumstances would have it, I was by myself that semester. I remember lying in bed, waking up to something not right. The chill that I was never able to forget was back and had woken me up. Or maybe it was the second feeling there was carried with it. I was positive I was about to die. I could feel the moments turning into seconds, ticking on some clock counting down until I was dead. I also knew I wasn't alone in my room. Something there was not only about to kill me, but was anxious for it. At least that's how it felt. I remember thinking, actually more like screaming in the back of my head, to get up, to reach up and turn on the light. The simple little desk lamp reading light that was positioned over the head of my bed. I knew that I had to get that light on, or I was dead. I had literally seconds left. Slowly, I reached up and flipped the switch. The fear suddenly left the room like a vacuum. My bedroom door rattled in its frame as if something slammed into it. Then I heard my accordion door slam open. My bedroom door has still been closed, just like it was when I went to bed. I remember the sound of another thud somewhere in the living room as I opened the bedroom door to walk out. The accordion door was wide open now, though. It still moved even slightly, rocking against the one side. I realized the thud had come from the front door of the apartment and something slamming into it. As I turned to look into the living room, I saw one of my roommates standing there, his back against his door, eyes wide and mouth hanging open. It was a look of shock and fear at what he had just seen. I asked John, not his name, what was wrong. He told me that he had come out of his room to go get something to drink in the kitchen and heard the noise of my door rattling, and he saw the accordion fly open, slamming against the one side as it collapsed. He said he saw a shadow of somebody move from the accordion door, rushing to the front door. He heard the front door rattle as whatever it was slammed into it to move through it. And then he realized I had come out of my room right behind it. He asked me what it was, and I told him it was a shade. Actually, his exact words were, "What the hell was that?" I told him they're like a ghost, but moodier and meaner. For some reason, the look on his face said he couldn't handle the truth, knowing how moody and mean and dangerous they really could be. That's a couple of the examples of my experience with shades, shadow people. There are others, but they blend more into potential involvement with nature spirits as well, so we can talk about that a different time. This is also separate from the experiences with ghosts, which is a whole other storytelling session. Sleep well and always keep a light handy at all times. I still do to this day, decades later. I'll never forget that day. It was a quiet weekday morning, and I was alone in the house since my boyfriend, now husband, was off at work. He's a builder, so his days are long, and I'm left to myself for hours on end. We had only recently moved in together, and I was still getting used to the new space. The creaks of the floorboards, the sounds of the wind brushing against the windows, and the unfamiliar quiet that seemed to linger in every room. The house was one he'd built himself, a beautiful mix of modern and rustic, but it still had that newness, that sense that it was waiting for our lives to truly inhabit it. Our bedroom was at the far end of the hallway, and from where the bed was positioned, I had a clear view straight down the hall. I never really thought much of it, just another part of the house, another detail to get used to. That morning, I was lounging in bed, half awake, enjoying the rare opportunity to just relax without any obligations pulling at me. The sun was streaming through the curtains, filling the room with a warm, golden light. Everything felt so peaceful, until it didn't. I don't know why I looked down the hallway. Maybe it was a sound, a shift in the light, or just one of those random instincts. But I did, and that's when I saw it. It started as just a shape, something my mind didn't immediately register. But as it got closer, I could see it clearly. A white dress, with little blue flowers printed all over it. It had these delicate ruffles around the wrists, almost like something out of an old photograph. The dress was floating, yes, floating, down the hallway, moving slowly but deliberately toward me. But there was no one wearing it. The dress was just there, suspended in the air, gliding toward the bedroom, as if someone invisible was inside it. My heart stopped. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. It literally felt like my heart just froze in my chest. For a second, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I just stared at it, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. But there was no sense to be made. This wasn't something that could be explained away. It was happening, right in front of me. Panic surged through me, a cold wave that made my entire body tremble. I wanted to run, to get out of that bed and bolt out of the house. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of lead, my body paralyzed with fear. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I pulled myself up to the top of the bed, curling into the corner as far away from the hallway as I could get. I squeezed my eyes shut and started praying harder than I ever had in my life. I just kept telling myself that if I didn't look, if I kept my eyes closed, it would go away. And then, after what felt like an eternity, the air in the room shifted. The pressure that had been building in my chest eased just slightly, and I felt lighter, like whatever had been there was no longer watching me. Cautiously, I opened my eyes, half expecting to see that dress right in front of me, but the hallway was empty. It was as if nothing had happened, but I knew better. I knew what I had seen, and I knew I'd never forget it. When my boyfriend came home that evening, I told him what happened. I expected him to laugh it off, maybe make a joke about how I'd been alone for too long, but he didn't. He listened, really listened, and then he took my hand and said, "This house is ours now. Whatever that was, it knows it's not welcome here." We never spoke of it again, but I've never felt truly comfortable in that house since. Sometimes when I'm alone, I catch myself glancing down the hallway, half expecting to see that dress floating toward me again. But it never has. Still, that image is burned into my mind. A reminder that some things just can't be explained, no matter how much we try. My name is Anna, and this just happened recently a few months ago. So from my grandmother on my mom's side, we have a gift, if you will. I'm not sure how, but it's been somehow passed down through the daughters of my late grandma. My grandmother, my mom, cousin, and I all share one particular trait. We can predict the future in our dreams. It sounds strange? Yes, but we can. We can't control what we see or hear in our dreams, but it's just something that's been passed down. We are Native American, however. My grandmother was a drinker. Her dreams would be of a life passing, whether that be family, friends, or anybody random. I, however, share that same dream prediction as her. My mom has dream predictions of warnings, telling her something bad is going to happen before it does. My cousin, hers are of life. My cousin's dream predictions are of when someone is pregnant or about to have a baby, although she can't tell of who the person is. Before the day my grandmother passed, I had a dream of her being in a white gown. She was happy and told me she was ready to go. I dreamt that the exact night before I last saw her again. I woke up hoping it wasn't true. Unfortunately, I heard devastating news from my uncle that she had sadly passed. Hearing of my grandmother's timing shattered me and tore me into pieces. Her and I were extremely close. The dream prediction is a devastating curse, I soon came to realize. Fast forward a few years ahead, I had a dream prediction of my late grandmother warning me of an evil that was trying to harm my cousin, mother, and me. After her warning, weeks later, an uninvited shadow figure began tormenting us three. My cousin and mom would be able to feel its touch, when it would grab their hair, arms, legs, or back. I, however, was the only one able to see, hear, and feel this shadow entity, both awake and in dreams. It would appear and only really speak to me. I never got a name or face, but I remember vividly how this shadow looked and sounded. It was tall, slim, and had arms hanging past its knees. Its voice sounded of a man's, and also that of a woman, but would always show itself at night. One night, I experienced my first out-of-body experience. As I was drifting off to sleep, I could feel the weight of my own body as my dream spirit was trying to break out of the physical body and finally enter the dream world. It felt as if I was trapped inside a coffin like the ones the Egyptians used, trying to escape. Not that I've ever been in one before, that is. Struggling to escape, I finally managed. I could feel myself floating in the air. Nothing I've ever felt before. I could see myself lying in bed as my dream spirit was hovering above myself. I was able to see my room from an entirely different perspective. I noticed my cats were all able to see me. My dream spirit, that is, as I was floating in the air of my bedroom. However, the fun and freeing feeling I had ended as I heard that shadow figure laughing. It was menacing. Never in my life had I heard a laugh sound so evil, dark, deep, and sinister. My spirit, I turned to my bedroom door to see these arms stretching from down the hall into my room, coming from the living room. A great sense of uneasiness dreaded over me. I tried to float down and back into my body, but the arms grabbed a hold of my legs. The hands were so large, with long fingers, sharp nails, and ice cold, sending shivers up my body. It all felt so surreal. Fighting my way back into my body, it managed to drag me in the air through the hall and into the living room. My heart racing, body aching from its painful grip on my legs, its ice-cold touch. As it managed to pull me into the living room, I could see its arms stretching from outside the windows. The two windows that I've never noticed in the day and awake were actually a portal to its world. Through the tall double windows, looking outside, I could see it standing outside. Only bigger, taller, and with a wicked grin and glowing white eyes. The light of the full moon casting over it, allowing me to see its true intentions and form. Struggling to find my way back to my bedroom and back into my body. Thankfully, somehow I managed to escape its grasp and was able to get back to my room and into my body again. When I awoke back in my own body, strangely, I wasn't afraid or terrified. I just felt uneasy. I sat up in bed, trying to comprehend why or for what it was trying to drag me into if I hadn't been able to escape from it. Where exactly it came from and how it got into my home. And why it so eagerly wanted to take my spirit away into its own world. I reached over the side of my bed to get my phone and look at the time. It was 3:15 a.m. Always at that exact time, not a minute early or later, but exactly that time. I always awake from my sleep. A little annoyed why I always had I was in time, but then thinking what significance does that time have to do with me, my dreams, and that shadow? Only realizing that the shadow has been with me since I was a child. I just don't know how it came in my home or where it came from. I stayed up all night until morning, and alert. The next day, I grabbed my sage and smudged every room inside my home, casting out any evil and negative energies that wished to harm me and my family. Then soon after, I grabbed my dad's cross rosary and Virgin Mary candle and said a Catholic prayer as I kneeling in my room and in front of a lit candle. And since then, we haven't seen or heard from the shadow anymore. Not yet, at least. I woke up abruptly, unable to move. My body felt like it was weighed down by an invisible force, my mind clouded with the confusion of half sleep. I tried to scream, to call out to the person lying next to me, but my voice was trapped in my throat. My eyes darted around the room, frantically searching for something, anything that made sense. And then I saw it. A dark figure stood at the foot of the bed, its form barely distinguishable in the dim light of the room. It was tall and shadowy, with blank white eyes that pierced through the darkness, staring directly at me. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, it just stood there, watching me. The sense of dread was overwhelming, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to rationalize it as sleep paralysis, a common phenomenon I had heard. But the terror I felt was far too real. Minutes felt like hours, and eventually my body relaxed, the weight lifting. I jolted upright, gasping for air, the figure gone. My partner stirred beside me, mumbling in their sleep, but I didn't want to wake them. I sat there, shaking, trying to convince myself it had just been a vivid nightmare. The morning came, and with it a sense of clarity. Over breakfast, I recounted the experience to my partner, laughing it off as a strange, spooky dream. But as I described the figure, I saw their face go pale. They put down their coffee cup, their hands trembling slightly. "I saw it too," they whispered, their voice barely audible. My heart sank. I thought it was just a dream, but it felt so real. The figure with the white eyes. We stared at each other in silence, the implications of what they were saying sinking in. It couldn't have been a hallucination if we both saw it. We tried to rationalize it, to come up with some logical explanation. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or our minds playing some cruel joke on us. But deep down, we both knew there was something more to it. The nights that followed were filled with restless sleep and a constant feeling of being watched. The figure didn't appear again, but its presence lingered in the shadows, a silent reminder that something was there, something we couldn't explain. We eventually moved out of that apartment, hoping to leave the haunting memory behind. But even now, in the safety of our new home, we sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, hearts racing, eyes scanning the darkness, dreading the return of the figure with the blank white eyes. I've always had a strange relationship with the supernatural. My mom insists I have some kind of sensitivity to ghosts, but I'm still on the fence about it. Maybe it's wishful thinking, or maybe it's something darker. But one thing is certain. I've had more than my fair share of eerie encounters. The most vivid, the one that still claws at the edges of my mind, happened when I was in 5th or 6th grade. It was a scorching summer day, the kind where the sun beats down on you with a relentless intensity. My family and I spent the day at the beach, splashing in the waves and letting the salt water wash away our worries. We returned home sunburned and exhausted, only to find a nightmare waiting for us. Our house had flooded while we were away. A pipe had burst and water had seeped into every crevice, turning our home into a damp, mold-infested mess. The air inside was thick with humidity, the walls already showing signs of swelling and damage. My parents were in a panic trying to salvage what they could, but it was clear we couldn't stay there. The risk of mold was too high, especially for me, so they packed me off to my grandma's house while they dealt with the aftermath. Now, my grandma's house had always been a bit off. It was an old, creaky place with long hallways that seemed to stretch into darkness, and rooms that felt colder than they should. I'd never felt comfortable there, and to make matters worse, I was terrified of ghosts and demons. I had this irrational fear of 3 a.m., the so-called witching hour. I'd always try to force myself to sleep before then, as if somehow that would protect me. But more often than not, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the clock to strike that cursed time. That night, I was in the front room on the couch, desperately trying to sleep. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlights seeping through the curtains. I could hear the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway, each tick louder than the last, as if it were counting down to something sinister. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to drift off. But that's when it happened. It started with a feeling, an overwhelming, gut-wrenching sensation that something was horribly wrong. It was like a wave of dread crashing over me, paralyzing me in place. I knew, without a doubt, that I was not alone. Someone, or something, was looming over me, watching, waiting. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly opened my eyes, half expecting to see nothing, to laugh at myself for being so silly. But as soon as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw it. Standing in the doorway to the kitchen was a figure, tall and impossibly thin, so tall that it had to hunch to fit under the doorframe. It wasn't human, at least not entirely. Its skin was smooth, almost waxy, and disturbingly similar to mine in color, but it lacked any of the details that make us human. There were no hands, no feet, and no face. Just a blank, featureless head that was somehow still staring directly at me. The figure stood there, motionless, as if waiting for me to acknowledge it. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen with fear. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by something in the room. I blinked, hoping it would disappear. But when I opened my eyes, it was still there. And that's when it moved. With a sudden, jerky motion, it turned and ran, its long, stick-like limbs carrying it deeper into the house. The sound of its footfalls echoed in the silence, a sickening, wet slap against the floor that made my stomach turn. I lay there, trembling, too terrified to move, too scared to follow it. My breath came in shallow gasps as I waited, expecting it to return, to finish whatever it had started. But it didn't come back. The house was deathly silent save for the ticking of the clock and the pounding of my heart. I didn't sleep that night, nor many nights after. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside sent me into a panic, fearing that the figure had returned to claim me. I never saw it again, but the memory of that night haunts me to this day. There's something rotten about my grandma's house, something that feels wrong on a fundamental level. I avoid going there as much as possible, even though my mom insists that spirits aren't something to fear, that we should be more concerned with the living than the dead. But that figure, whatever it was, wasn't just a spirit. It wasn't a mere ghost passing through. It was something far more sinister, something with intent, with malice. And though I've gone ghost hunting since, trying to make peace with the things that go bump in the night, that horrible, fleshy figure is the one thing that still keeps me awake, staring at the shadows, wondering if it's still out there, waiting for me to drop my guard. Curious for more creepy tales? Don't just listen to the shadows, join our community of the brave and the bold. Hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and ring the bell to never miss out on our allegedly true scary stories. Have your own ghostly encounters, sinister sightings, or otherwise scary event? Drop us a comment below. We're dying to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in to Past the Pumpkin's Glow. If you found yourself on the edge of your seat, make sure to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you won't miss any of our chilling tales. Dare to share your own spooky experiences in the comments below. Who knows, your story might just be our next creepy highlight. Until next time, keep the lights on and the spirits at bay. Sleep tight.